Hi, Carol. Welcome to the Sisterhood.
Oh, I feel like a sister. I feel like I'm part of a tribe here. It's great to be here.
Oh, you are. You are part of the tribe, and you are coming to talk to us about a topic that we have had requested, but we have never jumped into and just talked about head on. Like we've referenced it in conversations before, but we know that a lot of women are going to be pushing play because this is a topic that they want to know more about. And we feel like you are an expert voice to give us some wisdom. And they want to feel like maybe they're a little bit normal. Like things aren't, as you experience things and you wonder, is this normal? Is this normal? Is this normal? So we're going to talk today about menopause. And I would love if you would just start us off by giving a definition of what you mean when you use the word menopause, and then also define perimenopause, because I hear that thrown around a lot too. And I think people get confused.
Sure. Technically, the word menopause means the last menstrual period. But nobody, not even the very best OB-GYN doctor, can predict ahead of time when that will be, or if this period that you're having today is your last one. So basically, we make that diagnosis retrospectively. If you have not had a period for a year, and there's no other reasons that you're not having periods, and you're in a reasonable age and your hormones are showing that, then that's menopause. But just the way women talk to each other, and frankly, the way a lot of doctors and patients talk together about this is a season. And I think that's one of the first important things that I love talking with women about is this season of life. And that's frankly what we mean by perimenopause, the time around, because your hormones don't work the same day after day, month after month, from the time you're 11 or 12 until 50. There's a transition period, and that transition period is really what we mean when we say perimenopause. And that can start happening in a woman's 40s, and the gradual change can go on into a woman's 50s. So that whole span of life, perimenopause refers to that.
I've also heard that some people call it a second puberty or reverse puberty. And so explain a little bit about even biologically. Now, again, in simple terms, Carol, but biologically, what's happening here?
Well, what happened at puberty? At puberty, you started having periods. Why? Because your ovaries started making estrogen and releasing eggs. Many young women, when they go through puberty, their first periods are irregular and their emotions are all over the place. Well, in the menopause period, that transition period, your ovaries are stopping making estrogen because there are no more eggs left in your ovaries. So as the eggs are no longer there and the estrogen levels drop, the kinds of things your body is experiencing are closer in that way to what happened before puberty than they were during the reproductive years. And just like through puberty, the ups and downs of hormones through that season can create the emotional changes, and there's plenty of physical things that go along with that season. So when you say reverse puberty or second puberty, that it's kind of the mirror image, because your ovaries are stopping doing what they have been doing for 40, 45 years.
Well, that seems really clear. When you say it that way, it doesn't feel so scary.
It really isn't. Every single woman, there isn't a woman listening to us today who either won't or hasn't gone through menopause.
What are some of the typical benchmarks? I feel like we hear tons about hot flashes, or some people call them flushes. There's like all sorts of terminology. I'm like, oh my word. I didn't even like puberty, that word, the first time around. Now I'm hearing it a second puberty, and I'm like, still don't like that word. Okay. So hot flashes, we hear about like sleeplessness and, the weight gain. I mean, really, if I had to say the big three, those are the big three that people talk about. So
Yeah.
what's causing those? And then maybe what are some other symptoms that we can expect?
Yeah. If you think of menopause as the drop in estrogen, most of what a woman experiences makes sense because the symptoms of menopause are directly related to the change in estrogen. Now, there are other things happening in a woman's life in that same season, but whatever is directly related to menopause is related to the drop in estrogen. The hot flashes, the night sweats, I like to call them power surges.
Nice, Carol. Nice flip on
Yeah.
that.
And it's the way your brain demonstrates that it has been, frankly, addicted to estrogen for the last 40 years. There are receptors in your brain that respond to estrogen. And the signals that your brain sends out to the ovaries to make estrogen, they become very loud. Your ovary isn't responding, so your brain is trying super hard to get the ovary to respond. And with all that energy your brain is exerting, it impacts the flushes, night sweats, hot flushes, whatever you want to call it. We can measure that from your brain. And of course, the impact on your skin, on your blood vessels dilate, and you feel like, you want to throw off all your clothes or all the bed covers if it's at night. It's a response to what your brain is trying to do in getting estrogen. With the weight, the fat cells in a woman's body make estrogen. Now, not to the same degree that the ovaries do, but the little bit of estrogen that fat cells make, it's like your body is hungry for that. And so in a sense, the harder time that you have losing weight during the menopause season is your body trying to help. It's trying to get a few fat cells around to make a little estrogen because your body wants that estrogen. And so that's why it's harder to lose weight. But we do know also that your basic body metabolism changes during that season of life. And the way we know that that's only peripherally related to menopause per se is that women who go through menopause early, say before 40, that's considered premature menopause or abnormally early menopause, or women who go through menopause exceptionally late, they tend to gain weight at the same rate during the same span of life. And women who take estrogen for hormone treatment or women who don't tend to gain weight at the same rate or have the same challenges with managing your weight. So in a sense, the trouble with weight is an associated symptom. It's kind of peripherally related to menopause itself because it's not directly connected with the estrogen. And the sleep, you mentioned those three. The sleep mostly because of hot flashes at night. And even if you don't wake up, your body may be responding to what's a hot flash, and you didn't wake up to know that. But those fluctuations in the temperature that your body is experiencing and what your brain is trying to do can lead to a much less restful sleep for many women. So that's kind of how those three are related to menopause.
That's interesting. I have known women who have gone on estrogen just for the weight loss. And what you're saying is studies have shown that it doesn't make a difference. Is that what I'm hearing?
Correct. Yes. Estrogen by itself does not help you lose weight. Now, taking estrogen therapy, if you choose to, may help you feel better. It may help you sleep better. And we do know that sleep and weight are connected. It may make you have a better mood. And so you make healthier food choices. So you're eating healthier. It may let you feel like you are more yourself. So you exercise more. If there is one thing that makes a difference in managing weight around menopause, it's exercise. Another thing about weight at menopause is that the fat cells tend to accumulate in your midsection.
Yes, they do.
around the belly, everything kind of falls. And we can talk about breast in a minute because that's an important one too. But the fat accumulation around your midsection, that's the place in your body where the fat cells tend to make the most estrogen. And the only thing that we have been able to know from research that reliably slows down that fat redistribution to your midsection is exercise. It's not going to do it 100%, but it is going to make a difference.
That's interesting.
It's a good endorsement for exercise.
I tell people if there is one place to spend your healthcare dollar, it's on a good pair of walking or running shoes.
Yeah, that's really good. Okay, but I do want to go back to the estrogen because either people take it and they're like, I'm doing it, or there's the other camp that says it causes cancer. I am not touching it. So can you help us navigate that conversation?
Yeah. The fear that women have around estrogen is related to breast cancer. And this has now been studied for a few decades. And there's huge amounts of data. And the data is less than overwhelming. If there was an enormous impact of estrogen on breast cancer, we would have clarified that a long time ago. That doesn't mean the impact is not there. The impact is small, and there are other things that make a bigger impact on breast cancer risk than estrogen. There are certainly differences also in the kind of estrogen and how you take it. When I was just recently starting out in medical practice, I was actually paid by a pharmaceutical company to talk to other OB-GYN physicians and family practice doctors about hormone therapy and menopause, and Premarin is this brand name that some women have known for decades. And I read the research. Then the Women's Health Initiative study came out in the 1990s, and it upended everything. So there's been a lot more research trying to sort all that out. One of the bottom lines is that synthetic estrogens, which are in Premarin, work differently on the breast and certain other body tissues in some important ways than the natural kind of estrogen that your ovaries would be making. That's where the bioidentical hormone craze came from. And I want to also just debunk a myth here. Bioidentical hormones that many women around the time of menopause hear about, the important question is not whether it has the label bioidentical, but whether the compound, the actual hormone molecule, is exactly what your ovaries were making when they were making estrogen. Because there are some Food and Drug Administration approved products that contain that natural, what really is bioidentical estrogen. So you don't have to go to a compounding pharmacist necessarily. So you can get that natural estrogen in just standard, pill form. You don't have to do other weird things if you don't choose to. And that natural estrogen does not impact the breast and other body tissues in the same concerning ways. It doesn't mean that the risk is zero, but I basically do not prescribe Premarin or those synthetic estrogens anymore. I haven't for quite some time. I only prescribe estrogen that is exactly the same as a woman's body made when your ovaries were working. And one last thing about estrogen. One of the big reasons why some women consider estrogen is because of the vaginal and genital symptoms. Every single woman after menopause will at some point experience vaginal genital symptoms. And for women who have pain with sex or vaginal itching or irritation, taking vaginal estrogen does not get absorbed into the whole body like a pill or a patch or an injection might. And we do know that even women with breast cancer can take vaginal estrogen without affecting their risk. So I just want to make those differences clear, that estrogen isn't estrogen. You have to know specifically what the molecule is and how you're taking it.
So what are some, like, if I'm going to the doc, my OB, Can you give some examples of those? Just because I wouldn't know I would know I would ask, what's the compound, but
Yeah.
do you have some examples that I could
Yeah.
ask about?
Yes, exactly. One of the main brand names is estrace, Estrace, and that contains only estradiol, which is the molecule that your ovaries were primarily making. Now, there are other brands that use estradiol, especially vaginally. Vagifem is a vaginal brand, little tablets. There's also, you can get that in a spray on your skin or a skin patch, also with estradiol. So that would be what to ask for.
Okay. That's really helpful. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
You said we're going to the breasts. What were you going to say about estrogen in the breasts?
Yeah. A woman's breast density changes after menopause. And a lot of women are frustrated by that, but it actually makes the mammograms easier to read, for example. Prior to menopause, there's a lot of glandular tissue in the breasts, and that responds to the estrogen in your body. After menopause, the glandular tissue kind of subsides, and the fatty tissue in the breast becomes more predominant. So the texture of a woman's breast changes, the sensitivity to estrogen, the breast tissue's sensitivity to estrogen may make some women who take oral estrogen, that it gets to your whole body, have some breast tenderness with it. So it's something to be alert to. And just, again, to make a plea, get your mammograms, because it does save lives.
Okay. Well, I feel like we've covered a lot. We've covered boobs. We covered the privates. Carol, tell us about irritability, because I have heard of that as a symptom. And people often use it in kind of a condescending way, like, oh, she must be going through menopause because she's in a bad mood, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So talk to us about, is that real? What's going on there? Is it hormones? I mean, am I going through second puberty? Just like my teenage daughters were kind of matching each other with hormone levels and emotions. What is happening?
Yeah. One of the things that impacts the brain is the changing levels of estrogen, much more than a certain quantity of estrogen or any other hormone. And in the years coming up to the last menstrual period, the normal monthly fluctuations that a woman has in her reproductive hormones, estrogen, progesterone, and all of them, the swings become greater. The highs become higher and the lows are lower. And so that rapidly changing levels of reproductive hormones does make a woman's brain more sensitive to life, to things. But that does not give any of us an excuse for bad behavior. And one of the things that I have discovered over and over again in talking with women is other things in life tend to happen and pile on around this midlife season. We've already, kind of alluded to a couple of them, but some of those include, kids going away, empty nest. You've been married for a while, if you're married, and so your relationship, some things that you may have been able to tolerate, now you're wondering, can I continue to tolerate that? Job, caring for aging parents, all the other things in life kind of can pile on. And so it's not only what's going on inside a woman's body, it's also the things that are going on outside. And then I do want to say too, that the baggage a woman carries, we all go through life with stuff. None of us get through life unscathed, whether that's big T trauma or little traumas that keep piling up through life, all the stuff that has happened to us. I don't think anybody has been able to directly correlate this with hormone levels per se, but that seems to just all come out around the time of menopause. Maybe it's just that we around 40s or maybe 50s, okay, we've lived likely half or more than half our life. And what's the rest of my life? It just, something about that season makes it harder to just keep pretending that all those other things aren't there. And so I see a lot of women who are interested, for example, in coaching around that time of life because they just feel like they need extra help. They're not managing. And what do you do with irritability and that kind of thing? I do want to make a plea that you and I, as women, as sisters, we have much more ability to tell our minds what to do than most of us have ever fully embraced. And I think that's a good part of what you and the Open Door Sisterhood are talking about, giving women tools to manage their life and have agency and make choices. This isn't mind over matter, but God has given us executive authority over our minds. And you can tell your mind what to do, what to think about, what to focus on, how to respond, rather than just chasing after every thought and feeling. None of us do that perfectly, and we won't. We all have to keep growing there, but just to embrace that you have the choice about what your mind does. You may not be able to stop a feeling from coming, but you do have a choice about what you do next.
Yeah, and we really talk about that a lot here because it is hard to do that. It's hard to stop the feelings in the moment and to not just go with it, right?
Yeah.
It is hard. And yet I think that is actually the beauty of being in midlife, is that you've got some life experience under your belt and you can say, no, I have more agency here than maybe my younger self did.
Yes. You are not who you were at 20. Thank God.
Yeah.
And that life experience is valuable. You may feel like you've just been treading water, but you know things about life, about yourself, about human beings, about God, that you didn't know in the past. And that perspective, you can leverage that. You can tap into that with the Spirit of God helping you, and become more whole during this season than ever before.
That's a great word. Thank you. Okay. I really would love to talk about cardiovascular health. Because heart disease does go up significantly in menopause. And many call this the epidemic of misdiagnosis and undertreatment. Heart disease is the leading cause of death for women in the US, killing 301,280 women. And this was a study from 2019, or about 1 in 5. And so that is a staggering statistic. It's more than breast cancer. It's more than like all these other things that seem to have the headlines a little more. Not to minimize that, but just that I feel like cardiovascular health has not really had that same attention, and yet it's a real risk for women. Can you talk about why that is?
Cardiovascular health is the #1 killer of all people, regardless of gender. The thing about women is, up until menopause, the rate at which women get heart disease, it's much lower than men. Estrogen protects our hearts. The blood vessels have estrogen receptors in them. The estrogen keeps the blood flowing more smoothly during the woman's reproductive years. In one sense, you might even think about that as the heart and vascular system is trying to keep a woman alive so she can have her children and raise them. But once the ovaries stop making estrogen, that protection goes away. Once estrogen is gone, the protection goes away. And by 10 years after menopause, women's rate of cardiovascular disease reaches pretty equivalent to that of men. There's no significant difference after about 10 years. For women who choose to take estrogen, we do not recommend taking it to prevent heart disease. But for women who choose to start taking estrogen at the time of menopause because they have symptoms, hot flashes or vaginal dryness or whatever, that estrogen can delay the increase in cardiovascular disease. But even more importantly, there are many, many things that we as women can do to lessen our risk of heart disease. There are a couple risk factors that you can't do anything about: your age, your gender, and your genetics.
Mhm.
But beyond that, just about every other risk factor you can do something about. And those include exercise, nutrition, weight, diabetes, those smoking. Out of the 7 major risk factors, 5 of them you can do a lot about. Genetics and age are 2 that you can't do anything about. The other 5 you can absolutely do a lot about. And so talking about cardiovascular disease, I think it's important for women to realize that, yeah, this is a huge risk. My grandmother passed away from heart disease. So I know that in my own family. I also know that my grandmother did not take care of these modifiable risk factors well. There were several of these that she did not, her lifestyle did not help her in her heart disease. So knowing what we know today, there are absolutely so many things to do. And if I can mention the top 2. One would be exercise. We've already mentioned that, move your body. The second, I would say, is nutrition. And there's a lot of, controversy, what diet's best and what to eat and what not to eat. But when I talk to my patients, I tell them the one thing you need to remember is unprocessed. If you can move from whatever you're eating now to less processed, it's almost a guarantee you will be healthier and, frankly, happier with more energy. Our processed food has done us in. And so there's no single bigger nutrition factor, I believe, than moving to less processed.
Yeah, that's really good. And I was also reading some pretty staggering statistics around this subject on smoking, and that for someone who is a smoker, I mean, the risk goes up so significantly. I can't remember exactly what the numbers were, but it was astounding.
It's orders of magnitude. I can't remember the exact number now, but it's something like 5 or 10 times as much, something in that.
Because of what it does to the blood vessels in the heart,
Yes.
right?
Correct. Yes. I think most people know that smoking increases your risk of lung cancer, but it's not as talked about what smoking does to your vascular system, your heart and blood vessels, and absolutely. And I also know it's hard to stop. And I will just say this: if a woman is listening and you're struggling to stop, don't stop trying to quit. Get help. The average person who quits smoking has tried 7 times to quit before they quit long term. So don't give up. There are plenty of helps available now. It's worth going through the struggle. And once you get over those initial days, sometimes weeks, it absolutely gets better.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about alcohol use? Because I've also read a little bit about that in menopause.
Yeah. It seems like women who are unhappy with life, alcohol seems to be a go-to. Alcohol certainly increases the negative impact of life stage on heart disease, on weight, on sleep, so many of the things. And so it can become a challenge. The idea that red wine helps the heart, it may, if you can stick to one. But the problem is too many women don't stick to just one. And it's worth paying attention to. I think the bigger issue for most women is alcohol can cover over what's going on under the surface.
Yeah.
And to really deal with the alcohol use, you've got to address why you've got to address the why under the surface. What are you trying to cover up? What is it that you are going to alcohol for? And it's worth paying attention to.
Yeah, thank you. What about brain fog? Is that real in
Yeah.
menopause?
Yeah, it's real. Your estrogen, remember, is addicted to your brain is addicted to estrogen. There are estrogen receptors on brain cells, and some women are a lot more sensitive to that than others. But if you are experiencing that related to the drop in estrogen, yeah, it's real. And the things that some women get afraid of in that season, does brain fog mean I'm getting dementia or Alzheimer's or something like that? We do know that things that are good for the heart are good for the brain, in the sense of exercise, nutrition, adequate stress management, sleep, those basics. They really make a difference on your brain health. There is good research, for example, to show that in some women, regular exercise, meaning jogging, regular aerobic exercise, impacts their mood enough, their brain clarity enough, and their ability to sleep, that their menopause symptoms are dramatically reduced and they don't need anything else.
Wow.
That doesn't happen for all women, but it's as good as some medications in helping many of the symptoms that a lot of women experience. And it certainly does that for your brain.
That's really good to think about. Just that what's good for the brain is good for the heart.
Yep.
It's just good all the way around. So stick with that.
Yeah. And what's good for your mental health is also good for your physical health.
Yeah.
Yes.
And all of those things, because God made us integrated that way.
Yeah.
He didn't say, oh, here's one organ that's separate from everything else. And this talk about, I mean, I've never talked about estrogen this much in my life. I'm just going to put that out there.
Yeah.
All of this talk about estrogen and how many different things it impacts. I'm just amazed by that. I didn't know that it impacted the consistency of my breast or all the
protects
things
your
that
heart.
Yeah.
So that you can live to raise your children.
Right. So I can outlive that husband.
Yeah.
That has heart disease. Yeah. So I'm kind of thinking about how one thing impacts so many different factors. I'm also hearing us talk a lot about this period of menopause. What about, is there like an end time, like a post-menopausal time, or once we hit menopause, that's the phase we're in? How do we talk about what's after that?
Yeah. Interesting study called the SWAN study, done some years ago, tracked women going through menopause and for a number of years after to see how their symptoms did.
Mm-hmm.
There is a significant percentage of women that have very mild symptoms, and it's a blip on the radar, so to speak. Yeah, they feel it. They have some symptoms, but it's like their boat is just mildly rocking, and they go on with life. There are other women that have significant symptoms, but only last for 2 or 3 years. There is about 10 to 15% of women where their symptoms last at least 10 years or more. And by symptoms, I mean the primary ones we've talked about, like hot flashes, night sweats, irritability, those.
Great. Yeah.
So, yeah.
So pray that you're not in that 10 to 15%.
Yeah.
Exactly. But I just wanted to make 1 or 2 more comments on what you just said, Alex. God did make us integrated. And I think we pay too little attention to the way our bodies and minds, and frankly, our inner being, our spirit, our soul, how all those things are interrelated. And when you take positive action in one of those areas, it impacts all the others. For example, we know from research that connecting with others, like here in the Sisterhood, feeling like there's other people who get you, changes your brain. And changes your sense of well-being and your physical body's amount of stress hormones, et cetera. So we're very, very integrated. So I love that you made that comment and just wanted to second that.
Yeah. And I think it is important to think about in context of menopause, that what are we doing? And we're going to be actually having a whole issue on friendships in this series, but what are we doing to cultivate those non-measurable parts of us
Yes.
that is creating health?
Yes.
And so I appreciate that comment a lot. Okay, I want to go back to something practical, and that is sleep, because I do think sleep is vital to our mental and physical well-being,
Yep.
and yet we're getting less of it in menopause. And so I heard you say that nutrition and exercise, and so I don't mean, I'm not trying to just beat the same drum over and over, but are there certain things we can do to help set up sleep for success?
Yes, yes. Medically, I just want to say that if you choose to consider estrogen, that can make a significant difference. Beyond that, I talk to women about preparing their body, their mind, and their environment for sleep. We've talked about your body. A couple things about your mind. Part of what can be going on in this midlife season around menopause is your brain is just having a continual conversation with itself, and it's hard to shut off. Certainly taking the steps to get your body in the right sense is important, but just a couple things about your mind. I have found that this technique can help. It helps me, and it helps some of the patients that I talk with. When you get ready to go to bed, imagine all the stuff in your head as a physical thing, and imagine taking it out of your head for a minute, and you're holding it. Okay, you're looking at it. It's, spaghetti here and barbed wire there. I mean, it's kind of messy. It's kind of jumbled, but you're looking at all the stuff. And then imagine taking all that stuff and putting it in an imaginary box. And then you close the lid and put that imaginary box on the shelf or in the closet or in the bathroom or on the dresser or whatever. And it's there. You're not ignoring it. You're not denying it. And you can open it up again the next morning. Another technique that can help similarly is to keep a notepad by your bed. And those thoughts that come, if you write it down, you don't have to keep holding it in your head. Now, are those things going to make all the difference in sleep? By itself, not necessarily, but it is another step to take to help your sleep. And then lastly, your environment. The little LED lights, like, on your, if you still have a phone that's plugged in or a battery, clock or something like that, those little LED lights on the TV or whatever, for people who are having trouble sleeping, that can by itself impact the melatonin release in your brain and make it harder to sleep. So if sleep is an issue for you, make your room dark, keep it cool. You may have to wear layers if you are not taking estrogen and you're having hot flashes at night. Make sure there's layers that you can throw off, and that's part of life in menopause. It's another reason to significantly consider estrogen as an option. Those are just a few things about sleep.
Yeah, that's really great. The no screen zone, I've heard, is
Yes.
great, and then turning them off an hour before you go to sleep. And
Yes.
we tend to think this stuff doesn't matter, but that's because we're not inside of our brains, like the literal physical side of our brains. And so we're like, oh, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. But actually it's not fine. Those things do impact our sleep. And so,
Yes, I do that myself. I have a specific time at night where if my laptop's open, I close it. If the TV is on, I turn it off. And I will do something like read a book. You can, take a warm bath if that's your thing. Drink a glass of, a cup of chamomile tea, herbal tea, not caffeine. Play some worship music, journal, do something not with screens in that last 30 to 60 minutes. I do that myself, and it makes an enormous difference.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Carol, what resources do you recommend? I mean, I'm reading a book called The Menopause Manifesto, and I have to say, she goes way into stuff that I really don't care about. And, I'm recommending that book as a qualifier, that if you want to kind of skip and just go to the middle of the book where it talks about all the menopause symptoms really deeply, that's great. But are there some other resources you recommend?
One is a online menopause clinic, excuse me. The name is Genev, Gennev. And there's a whole ton of resources there. And it's a place also where you can connect with a menopause coach, for example, physicians, telehealth. They do have a few supplements that they suggest, and you can get prescriptions from a physician if you need that. Just a great place, online menopause clinic. So that is one source. And then at our website, Dr. Carol Ministries, we've got quite a number of things in this area. We have a digital course, Navigating Midlife. We have a book, Dr. Carol's Guide to Women's Health, an ebook, Dr. Carol's Guide to Sex and Menopause. And there's one that I might just, an easy one to suggest, drcarolministries.com/hormones. And that's an easy place you can go, and you get some practical tips and suggestions specifically for women in this season of life. So yeah, thanks for
Well,
that.
that is perfect. That is absolutely perfect. And we will link to all of that in the show
That's
notes.
great.
So people don't have to do the legwork, so they can
Yep.
just click right on it. Well, Carol, this has been wonderful and so informational and helpful to us. So thank you so much.
I have had a wonderful time and glad to be part of the sisterhood.
All right. Bye,
Thank
Carol.
you. Bye.